Arthur's family truth. I heard my son say something about me that didn't make sense. 3 weeks is enough time. They thought I was outside. I didn't move. By then, the pattern would be obvious to anyone looking. I stopped, not because the words were alarming, not yet, because the tone was wrong. Measured. Like he was reading from a list. Then he said, "Dr. Pruitt doesn't know his history." That's the point. When we bring Dad in, Pruitt sees what we need him to see. And Dr. Weston? Jennifer asked. Dad's been with her 17 years. She knows him too well. We switch him before the evaluation. I set the pressure gauge into my bag slowly. I picked up the wrench. I walked back out the side door, the same way I'd come in, and pulled it shut without a sound. I drove home. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table where Ruth and I had eaten breakfast for 32 years, and I wrote down every word I could remember in the order I'd heard it, in the notebook I keep for hardware estimates. I dated the top of the page. I wrote the time. I underlined the names. The next morning I drove to the Columbus Public Library. The librarian at the reference desk helped me find a computer terminal without asking why. I looked up guardianship law, power of attorney procedures, and the legal requirements for declaring a person mentally incompetent. It took 2 hours. I printed 11 pages and folded them into my jacket. What I read matched what I'd heard. If someone could demonstrate cognitive decline through medical testimony and documented behavioral evidence, they could petition the court for guardianship. The guardian would control finances, medical decisions, and living arrangements. The standard wasn't certainty, it was preponderance. Enough evidence to convince a judge that a person could no longer manage their own affairs. Doctors, documented incidents, family witnesses. I sat with the printouts for a while, then I drove to Arthur Bowman's office. Arthur has handled my legal affairs for 18 years. He drew up Ruth's estate documents. He drafted my will 5 years ago, in the months after she died, when I couldn't see past the grief clearly enough to think about anything except putting Kevin's name on everything I owned. When I walked in, Arthur stood and extended his hand the way he always does, unhurried, no performance. I told him what I'd heard. I told him I'd written it down. I laid the notebook on his desk. He read it without speaking. When he finished, he looked up. "What you're describing is premeditated elder abuse, Walter." He set the notebook down carefully and was quiet for a moment. "We'll need more than your word, especially once they begin building a documented record of your supposed decline." I asked what could be done. He didn't answer right away. He looked out the window toward the courthouse across the street, then reached for a yellow legal pad. He said we needed to move carefully, and that he would need a few days. He asked me one question: was I prepared to let this play out without reacting? I thought about Kevin's voice through that wall, the flatness of it. I said yes. Before I left, I asked Arthur to pull my existing will. His assistant retrieved it while we sat there. The document left everything to Kevin. I'd written it 8 months after Ruth died, when the future felt like something that happened to other people. "I want to change it," I said. "But not the way they expect." Arthur wrote something on the legal pad. He nodded once and I walked out. Kevin called the next morning at 8:30. I let a small hesitation enter my voice before I picked up. He asked how I was feeling. I told him I'd been finding things in the wrong places, the truck keys in the refrigerator, that kind of thing. He said that was concerning. He said maybe I should see someone new, someone more current than Dr. Weston. I told him that was probably a good idea. There was a pause, and then he said he would start making calls today. Not next week, today. He had someone in mind already. Before we hung up, he told me not to worry, that he would handle the scheduling himself and call me back with the details. I thanked him and set the phone down. I wrote the time in my notebook and the word today with a circle around it. 2 days later, Jennifer arrived with grocery bags. She moved through my kitchen with practiced efficiency. Canned goods relocated. Glasses shifted to the lower cabinet. My medication bottles pulled from the counter and placed in a drawer I haven't opened in 3 years. When she finished, she turned and said the new arrangement would be easier for me to manage. Then she mentioned in the same even tone that she'd noticed I'd been leaving the porch light on during the day, that it had happened 3 times this week, she said. She was just keeping track, she said, in case it was something we needed to mention to the doctor. I said I appreciated her attention. After she left, I stood in the kitchen for a minute. Then I opened my notebook and wrote down what she'd said, word for word. The porch light had a sensor. It hadn't been on during the day once. A week later, Kevin called to confirm a Tuesday appointment with Dr. Elias Pruitt, a geriatrician he'd found through the hospital network. He read the address twice, slowly. When I said I had it, he said he just wanted to be sure. He mentioned the appointment twice more before the call ended. That evening I drove to Dr. Carol Weston's office and asked the receptionist if I could speak with her after hours. Carol had been my physician for 17 years. I told her what was happening. I told her I needed a full cognitive evaluation, standard battery, documented, dated, held in her files until I asked for it. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Sit down. Let's get started." The appointment with Dr. Pruitt lasted 40 minutes. Kevin and Jennifer sat in the waiting room while I went through the assessment: word recall, clock drawing, sequential arithmetic. I performed adequately, not well. I made the specific kinds of errors that suggest early-stage inconsistency without suggesting immediate crisis. Hesitating before the third word in a recall list, drawing clock hands 2 minutes off, pausing before subtracting 7 from 93. When Pruitt met with Kevin and Jennifer afterward, I sat in his office and listened to the muffled tone of voices through the wall. Kevin's posture when he returned told me the conversation had gone the way they wanted. On the drive home, Jennifer said Dr. Pruitt seemed thorough. Kevin said it was good, they'd acted now, while things were still manageable. I stared out the window and said I hoped I wasn't becoming a burden. Kevin said I could never be a burden. In the rearview mirror, I saw him look at Jennifer. She gave the smallest nod. 3 days before I was due back in Arthur's office, I came home from a morning walk and found Kevin's car in my driveway alongside a dark sedan I didn't recognize. Through the front window, I could see 3 people in my living room: Kevin, Jennifer, and a woman in a dark jacket with a briefcase open across her knees. I walked around to the side of the house. Ruth's old hydrangeas along the foundation gave enough cover. The window was cracked 2 inches. The woman's voice was clipped, professional. She was asking about documentation. Jennifer told her she'd been keeping detailed notes, incidents where I'd called Kevin multiple times asking the same question about my medication. An occasion where I'd left the garden hose running and flooded part of the basement. I gripped the window ledge. Neither of those things had ever happened. Kevin said the challenge was my existing physician, Dr. Weston, had known me too long to present the picture they needed. That was why Pruitt's evaluation was going to be the primary medical record going forward. The woman asked whether there was any particular urgency driving the timeline. There was a pause. Jennifer said they'd found something. She'd been looking through my insurance files 3 months ago and discovered I'd changed my will 18 months prior, that I'd left my entire estate to a charity, the Columbus Youth Foundation. The house, the savings, all of it. Kevin's voice shifted. "You found that 3 months ago and didn't tell me." Jennifer's answer came smoothly, as if she'd rehearsed it. She'd needed time to understand the full picture first. She said it was clear I'd been in a vulnerable state when I made the decision, that someone had taken advantage of my grief. The woman asked the value of the estate. Jennifer said the house appraised at approximately $374,000. Savings and investments, another $223. Close to $600,000 total. A silence. The woman said that was substantial enough to justify the cost of legal proceedings. She said if they could establish diminished capacity at the time the will was drafted, a court-appointed guardian could potentially challenge it. She asked whether there was a documented pattern of decline leading back to that period. Kevin said yes. He said my behavior in the months after Ruth's death had been erratic, that I'd isolated myself, made decisions that weren't like me. He said he had people who could speak to it. I stood outside my own window and listened to my son describe a version of my grief that had been reshaped into evidence. The woman said they should move quickly. She said Pruitt's evaluation would be central to the filing. She asked Kevin if he was prepared to serve as petitioner. He said he was. He said he wanted what was best for his father. I walked back to the front of the house and sat in my truck until the sedan pulled out. Kevin and Jennifer followed a few minutes later. Neither of them looked toward where I was parked. I sat there for a while. Then I took out my notebook and wrote down the number Jennifer had said, $597,000. The house Ruth and I bought in 1981. The savings from 40 years behind the counter of a hardware store, 6 days a week, every week except Christmas. The money I'd decided to leave to a foundation that helped kids in this city finish school. All of it. I wrote Arthur Bowman's name at the top of the next page. I wrote the word tomorrow and underlined it twice. Arthur's office was ready before I arrived. He had his assistant pull 3 chairs to the conference side of the room and set a folder on the table in front of where I would sit. He didn't tell me what was in it. He said we would get to it when the time came. I signed the trust document that morning. Arthur walked me through every clause at the pace of a man who understood that the words mattered as much as the signatures. The house, the savings, and all remaining assets transferred into a protected structure. Liam and Nora, Kevin's children, my grandchildren who had never once asked me for anything, would have full access when each of them turned 25. The document contained one exclusion clause, reviewed by 2 independent attorneys before I put my name to it. Kevin Crane and Jennifer Aldridge Crane were permanently barred from accessing, borrowing against, or benefiting from any portion of the trust under any circumstances whatsoever. Not now, not later, not through intermediaries or legal challenges or amended petitions. The language left no opening. Arthur locked the signed document in his office, safe before I stood to leave. He told me to go home, act normally, and wait for them to make their move. He said people in their position rarely waited long once they believed they were close. It took 4 days. They came on a Tuesday afternoon, Kevin, Jennifer, and a woman I hadn't seen before. Mid-40s, dark jacket, a briefcase she carried with both hands. Kevin introduced her as Ms. Diane Rourke, a social worker who specialized in elder care transitions. She sat across from me in my own living room with a practiced expression positioned somewhere between sympathy and procedure, and she told me that my family had raised serious concerns about my safety and daily functioning. She said Dr. Pruitt's evaluation had indicated early-stage cognitive decline. She said the research was clear that early intervention produced significantly better long-term outcomes. She said my family had done the difficult work of identifying a facility that could provide the level of structured support appropriate to where I was right now. Kevin set 3 brochures on the coffee table. Sunset Manor, color photographs of a common room with round tables and laminated placemats. A smiling woman in a cardigan holding a cup of tea near a window with curtains that matched the walls. I picked up the top brochure and turned it over. Jennifer opened her folder and placed a document in front of me. Power of attorney, comprehensive, not the preliminary placeholder she'd described it as during our previous conversation. It assigned Kevin full authority over my finances, my medical decisions, and my living arrangements. She said it was a formality. She said it was simply a mechanism to ensure I had adequate support for complex decisions going forward. She said it was what any caring family would do in this situation. I read the first 2 paragraphs carefully, then I read the third. Then I set it down on the table and looked at the 3 of them. I'd like to call Arthur Bowman before I sign anything. The room shifted. Kevin said Arthur wasn't necessary for documents this straightforward. Jennifer said my long-standing reliance on an advisor who had no specialization in elder care law was understandable, but might not be serving my actual interests at this stage of life. Ms. Rourke checked her watch and said her schedule was unfortunately quite constrained, that if we could complete the preliminary paperwork today, it would secure my position at the facility while I had the time and space to adjust to the transition. I looked at each of them in turn, then I picked up my phone and dialed. Arthur answered on the second ring. I told him I had guests and that they'd brought paperwork they were hoping I'd sign today. He said to tell them we would reconvene at his office tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. He said to leave every document exactly where it was and not to move anything. I relayed that to the room. Miss Rourke said she had a prior commitment tomorrow that couldn't be rescheduled. Kevin said there was genuinely no reason to involve legal counsel at this stage, that doing so would only slow down a process designed to help me. Jennifer said the opening at Sunset Manor had a waiting list and that timing mattered. I said 10 o'clock, Arthur's office. I offered to write down the address. They left without the signatures. Jennifer held the folder against her chest on the way out like she was carrying something she wasn't ready to let go of. They arrived the next morning at exactly 10. Kevin shook Arthur's hand with the ease of someone who had decided the meeting was a formality he was participating in as a courtesy. Jennifer carried her folder. Ms. Rourke sat slightly apart from the other 2, briefcase upright on her lap, her posture suggesting she had learned to position herself for quick exits. Arthur waited until all 3 of them were settled. Then he set a small digital recorder on the center of the conference table. Kevin looked at it. "What is that? A recording of yesterday's conversation at your father's home," Arthur said. His voice was the same unhurried tone he used for everything. Ohio is a one-party consent state. Walter consented to the recording in his own home. The recording is fully admissible. Kevin's eyes moved to me. I held his gaze and didn't say anything. Arthur pressed play. The voices came through clearly, the recorder had been placed well, and the room had been quiet. Jennifer's precise recitation of incidents that had never occurred. The repeated medication calls, the flooding in the basement, the pattern of confusion she had been carefully documenting over recent weeks. Kevin's explanation of why Dr. Weston needed to be replaced before the evaluation delivered in the same flat, measured tone I'd heard through the garage wall. The attorney's assessment of the estate value and the legal pathway for a guardian to challenge a prior will. Jennifer's delivery of the number close to $600,000 without any tremor in her voice. Kevin confirming he was prepared to serve as petitioner. Kevin saying he wanted what was best for his father. The recording ran for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it ended, no one spoke for a long moment. Jennifer found her voice first. She said the recording was illegal. Arthur cited the relevant statute without raising his voice and explained that it was not. She said it had been obtained through deception. Arthur said Ohio law made no such distinction for single-party consent. She said it would be inadmissible in any proceeding. Arthur said she was welcome to test that position in court and that he looked forward to the opportunity. Kevin turned to me. His voice shifted into something that sounded like the version of concern I'd heard for the past several months. The practiced warmth I'd spent weeks performing alongside. Dad, you need to understand everything we did came from a real place. I've been genuinely worried about you. That recording doesn't capture the full picture of what we were going through as a family. I reached into the folder in front of me and slid a document across the table without answering. Dr. Carol Weston's report. Full cognitive battery conducted 8 days before my appointment with Dr. Pruitt. Every category scored within normal range for my age. Her clinical notes described a patient who was alert, fully oriented, and demonstrating no indicators of cognitive decline across any measured domain. She had included a brief addendum in her own handwriting, noting that the patient had specifically requested the evaluation in anticipation of a formal competency challenge and had presented with complete clarity regarding the circumstances. Ms. Rourke picked up the report. She read it in full. When she finished, she set it on the table in front of her and did not look at Kevin or Jennifer. Kevin stared at it. He said it was impossible. He said Dr. Pruitt had identified clear early indicators. He said 2 physicians couldn't arrive at opposite conclusions unless one of them had been working from incomplete information. Dr. Pruitt saw exactly what I showed him, I said. I knew what signs you needed him to see. I'd spent time understanding the assessment protocols. It wasn't difficult to give you a result that fit your timeline without going far enough to trigger immediate intervention. The color left Jennifer's face in stages, the way it does when a person is processing something they can't immediately reframe. Then she stood up. The word she used was one I hadn't heard directed at me in 71 years of living. Her voice cracked somewhere in the middle of it. She said I had set a deliberate trap. She said she couldn't comprehend what I was doing to my own family. She said they had come from a place of genuine love and concern, and I had treated them like targets. She said I was the one who should be ashamed of what was happening in this room. I waited until she was finished. You told a lawyer I flooded my basement, I said. I've owned that house for 43 years. It doesn't have a basement. The silence that followed was the kind that completes itself. Nobody tried to fill it. Arthur opened the trust document and read the key provisions aloud in the same unhurried voice he used for everything. The asset transfer into the protected structure, the beneficiary designations for Liam and Nora at age 25, and then the exclusion clause, full text, both names, no softening language, no ambiguity about scope or duration. Kevin Crane and Jennifer Aldridge Crane permanently and completely excluded under all circumstances. Kevin read his own name in the clause. He read it a second time. He set the document flat on the table. When he looked up, the rehearsed concern was gone. What remained looked like exhaustion, the particular kind that comes from running a long distance and arriving somewhere worse than where you started. So that's it, he said. We get nothing. Liam gets everything he needs when he turns 25. So does Nora. They had no part in this. I won't punish them for choices they didn't make. I kept my voice even you and Jennifer made your choices. The trust reflects that. He looked at the recorder. Then at the report. Then at me. I'm your son, he said. The way he said it, I understood he meant it as an argument. I know that, I said. I've known that for 47 years. It's the reason I'm telling you directly. Instead of letting you find out through a court filing, I paused. What kind of son you want to be from here, that's still yours to decide. That door doesn't close today unless you close it yourself. Miss Rourke stood. collected her papers, and said she apologized for any role she had played based on information that had not been accurate. She did not shake anyone's hand. She walked out at a pace that suggested she had other places to be and was grateful for it. Arthur mentioned before Kevin and Jennifer rose from their chairs that a separate fund had been established enough to cover 1 full year of family counseling if they chose to use it. The fund had no other accessible purpose and could not be redirected. Jennifer picked up her folder and walked out without responding. Kevin stood at the door for a moment. He looked at me with an expression I didn't have a clean name for. Not quite regret, not quite anger. Something that hadn't finished becoming either one. Then he left. 6 months later, I was in a condominium 15 minutes from Liam and Nora's school. The house had sold in 3 weeks to a couple with 2 young children who asked if the backyard got afternoon sun. I told them it did from April through October. They bought it the same day. The proceeds were in the trust, structured exactly as written. I kept enough to live without counting the months and built a proper workshop in the second bedroom. A real workbench, open shelving, lighting that didn't make me squint. The kind of space I should have made for myself a decade earlier. Liam came on alternating Saturdays. I was teaching him plumbing, fittings, pressure testing, how to find a leak by sound before you ever touch the pipe. He had steady hands and the patience to let a joint cure before he tested it, which is rarer than it sounds in a 17-year-old. His sister came some Saturdays and read on the couch while we worked, which suited all 3 of us. One afternoon, she lowered her book and asked me, without any particular build-up, why her parents didn't come with them anymore. I set down the coupling I was threading. I thought about how to answer her honestly without handing her something that wasn't hers to carry. I told her that adults sometimes make choices that cost them things they can't get back, and that the people who love them still have to decide, every day, how much of the door to leave open. She considered that for a moment. Then she went back to her book. Kevin called on a Wednesday evening 3 weeks after that. His voice was quieter than I'd heard it in a long time. Not measured, not performed, just his actual voice asking an actual question. He wanted to know if I would consider family counseling. All of us together, he said. If I was willing, I told him I would think about it. After I hung up, I sat on my balcony and looked out at the city in the dark. Somewhere across Columbus, Liam was probably doing homework. Nora was probably reading. 2 kids who had inherited nothing yet, except the knowledge that someone had made sure they would be taken care of. I thought about what I'd told her. The door. It was still open. That much was true. What he did with it was up to him. Stories like this rarely begin with conflict. They begin with small things. An extra phone call. An unannounced visit. A question about finances asked in a tone casual enough to go unexamined. The distance between genuine concern and deliberate control can be surprisingly narrow, and the boundary between the two is not always visible to everyone involved, sometimes including the people crossing it. What tends to go unnoticed is that the person in the most vulnerable position is often the one who understands the situation most clearly. Stillness is not the same thing as unawareness.